Hi, everybody. My name is Yosef. Welcome to this session. We're going to do a Q&A with Jeff. Jeff, do you want to share a little bit about yourself?
So my name is Jeff Coleman. If you've seen me on social media, it's probably on Twitter as TechnoCrypto or sometimes Jeff.eth. I'm someone who's been in the blockchain space for about 13 years now. First Bitcoin, when this guy came along and said, "Hey, this Ethereum thing," I was like, "Oh, that's interesting." So that became a pretty full-time interest of mine. I'm a technologist, a researcher, um, worn many other hats over the years, but I'm also very passionate about connecting the global Ethereum community into the local community in places like Accra and elsewhere. There's been a bit of a gap there, and it's a bridge that we need to make stronger and connect better as a community. So,
Thanks, Jeff. And our travel blogger, Vitalik, do you want to share something?
And I also co-founded Bitcoin Magazine, but um, yeah, I know. So I do Ethereum things. I think these days I do a combination of like some protocol level research and development work, but also kind of coordinating across different people in the ecosystem layer and trying to figure out like what are all of the different pieces that need to be done to really make Ethereum useful for billions of regular people, and trying to you know do my part to help make sure that all of those different pieces happen.
Thanks, Vitalik. And my name is Yosef. My role, I wear multiple hats, one of which is helping build a bridge between global Ethereum communities and African communities, and also on a mission to have more African builders, African educators, so that we build the solutions that we want with blockchain technologies, and achieve the vision of more than 1 billion users, because we can actually use this trust coordination layers for a lot of our needs. So I think we're going to jump into questions. Who has questions to ask the panel here? Great. While you all get set up, I'm going to ask Vitalik the first question. Tell us, for people who are kind of new to Ethereum, can you give us a little bit about what Ethereum is, how it's set up, and what makes it different from other chains that some of us hear about?
Sure. So I usually describe Ethereum as a general purpose blockchain, right? So, a blockchain, we all know this kind of decentralized computer network whose job it is to like keep track of and come to agreements on data and events that happened and who did different things at particular times. It's a kind of network that's useful for applications like money, but it's also used for very useful for many other kinds of applications as well. And the Ethereum project basically started out of this desire to take what's already been done in the blockchain space with Bitcoin and with a couple of other projects that were focused on one application and try to build something general purpose so you could create a platform that brings the same benefits and lets you create these global, open, transparent, permissionless applications for like any use case that you can come up with that makes sense to do on a blockchain at all, right? So the project started at the end of 2013. It's been um, the chain launched in 2015. The chain has been running for over 7.5 years now. For about 5 months, it's now been running as a proof of stake chain, which has been, I think, wonderful for the ecosystem. But I mean, in terms of like what makes Ethereum different, I think there's different answers that depend on like what you're comparing it to, and uh, like what aspects of it that you care about, right? Like it's possible to compare Ethereum to Bitcoin. It's possible to compare Ethereum to Cardano. It's possible to compare Ethereum to the AI industry, right? It's possible to compare Bitcoin to traditional Silicon Valley tech companies, right? It's possible to com- compare it to like parts of governments, right? And depending on like what metaphor you take or like what aspect that you care about, I think the answer often ends up being different. But one of the common factors is how we really value decentralization, and we really value you know Ethereum not just as a technology, but as this sort of community where we have lots of different people from many different parts of the world with lots of different expertise and experiences coming together in this ecosystem where anyone is free to enter and become part of it, whether that means being part of running the network, whether that means building an application, whether it means participating in the ecosystem in some other way, right? Like, we really value doing the best that we can to be this network where, like, really anyone can participate at any part of the stack. It's something that does not depend on this kind of small centralized group of people in order to operate. Like, even the Ethereum Foundation itself, right? We kind of really believe in decentralization at an organizational level. So, for example, the foundation spends more money on grants than it does on paying its own employees, right? So we actually try to kind of distribute power to and agency kind of to the edges and to independent groups who know what they're doing in many cases better than we do as much as possible. And Ethereum is this very big and international community of people who are building applications, all and just all kinds of things on top of the technology, right? And it includes finance, DeFi, saving money and moving money across borders. It includes things like NFTs, non-financial applications, things like ENS, different kinds of records, identity and like reputation-related applications, DAOs, these kind of communities of people that are managing assets by using rules that are encoded on programs on the blockchain, like all of these things. And there's a really big community that's building lots of applications in each one of those areas. And this is the community that I think, like, as a foundation, we try to do the best that we can to support.
Thank you. Quick question to you all: who's building a project on the Ethereum network here? Raise your hand. Maybe could you all just stand up so we see you all? Cool, awesome. How many people here are developers, either at the application or protocol level on Ethereum, including layer twos? Raise your hand really high. Okay, cool. So just wanted to open it up to questions that people have here that would like to ask to Vitalik or Jeff.
Hi, yes, thank you so much. And thanks for your team. My question is straight to you and Vitalik. So if you consider Africa, as far as blockchain is concerned, I've always said it's a need in Africa, whilst it's a want in the West. It's easier to send $1 to somebody in San Francisco from the West, other place of US, than it is from Ghana to Togo. So if you look at blockchain and its applications, rather, instead of concentrating more in the Asian region and North America, what is the strategy for Ethereum as far as Africa is concerned? Because I know from East Africa, Central Africa, South Africa, West Africa, especially Nigeria, young people are building stuff, but there's no support. It's not a missionary approach. Bull run bear. People are building stuff on Ethereum. But if you look at the infrastructure as it is, the support has been in Asia and North America. What's Ethereum's strategy as far as Africa is concerned? You have a continent, 1 billion people in the next 6 years, 0 to 30. This is where the use of blockchain is. So what's your strategy for Africa? Thank you.
Jeff, can you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll answer it in several parts. So first of all, I'm going to talk a little about how I got into the community. Before blockchain was ever a thing, I was living in Ethiopia for a while. I lived there for about 10 years. I went to school in Kenya. And when I first heard about blockchain, I immediately thought exactly what you said. Like, a lot of these abstract ideas that people have around blockchain, oh, maybe it's useful for this, maybe it's useful for that. In much of the global north, it's a theory. And part of that theory is a narrative that says, oh, it'll be useful for financial equality, it'll be useful for access, but it's very theoretical. And to get to the second part of your question, I have to add one little explanation, which is, one of the differences between the Ethereum community and a lot of the other communities is that the Ethereum community is very spread out, and everything that happens in Ethereum is managed by primarily the community. It's not just the Ethereum Foundation that does everything. So I'm not a member of the Ethereum Foundation. Yosef's not a member of the Ethereum Foundation. In a lot of these other protocols, the crowd sale goes directly into the foundation runs everything. That's not how it is in Ethereum. So when I hear the question, what is Ethereum's strategy? I ask, what's the Ethereum community's strategy? And I think that the simplest answer is it's been lacking. It hasn't been there, right? I think like there's many factors in what this has been, but for a long time, this idea of actually using blockchain in places that matters has been lacking. And some of the reasons for that have been about the rapid growth of the protocol, raising fees to a level where the protocol is inaccessible. That's been a big priority for people who are working on the core level, trying to make that better, trying to scale Ethereum, trying to get it to the point where we have roll-ups and things that bring costs down so that people can use it. But I think because of that and because of other systemic issues in the Ethereum community, there's been excuses about why that global community has been mostly concentrated in these other places. And when the communities exist here, they don't get the access and support that they need. So the other thing that I'd like to say in response to that is I hope that this is changing, right? And it's coming from behind. I think there's a lot of work to do. I think like the global Ethereum community has not shown up on the continent the way that they need to. Part of the purpose of this trip, why we're spending a month here, is to try and start that bridge and to start expanding that, because in Ethereum, you can't just have the foundation decide to fix that. It's the broader Ethereum community needs to come here, connect here, be plugged in. When people are working on projects here, they need to have that access. They need to have that support. Part of that is about spending time together and just getting to know each other. But part of that is also about the physical times that we connect. The major events for the Ethereum community have been held in places that are often hard to get visas to. They're expensive to travel to. There's all these barriers in place. And I think there needs to be a lot of work to systematically break those barriers down. So across the spectrum, how that needs to play out is, one, more interpersonal contact, because it's wonderful that Vitalik's here, but the foundation by itself cannot fix this problem. The community as a whole needs to address this. So we need to get more interpersonal contact, get people plugged into those projects, and then we need to get people thinking the opposite way around. Yosef had a great point that in some ways is kind of like the founding theme for this trip, which is it's not that Africa needs Ethereum, it's that Ethereum needs Africa. This is the place where the young talent is growing up. This is where new people are. This is where there's so many new developers and technologists and innovators. And exactly like you said before, a lot of these ideas of what blockchains are useful to solve are very theoretical in the global north. They're very abstract. They're very nice to have. They're not have to have. And because of that, if you just take those ideas and try to transport them here, they'll fail, which is great because there are enough ideas here that need to succeed. And the ideas here are in contact with actual problems, with actual situations that people are facing. They're designed to address actual issues. And in my view, that's what blockchain is really all about. So what I would like to see is a reversal of that scenario. And the pipeline of information we need to build is for people around the world who are not plugged into local communities here to become informed, because they're presently ignorant and they have a lot of abstract projects that maybe don't make sense, that they need to loosen their grip on and take a look at what people are building here. That's my answer.
One quick thing I'd like to add to what Jeff said. I think also like having communities here connect with one another to create enough of a gravitation point. I was quite surprised just how many different sub-communities even exist in Accra that we're kind of getting to meet individually. So I hope you all use this space to do that. And I've heard of initiatives such as ETH Accra that want to happen. I think it'd be really amazing to make something like that a success and for the local community to rally around. And those of us who are either bridge building or some of us who are in the global Ethereum community can plug in and support that. So I think the more there's connectivity within the local community, it makes it a lot easier to then communicate to the rest of the world how to approach and think African ecosystems. Because what global builders are optimizing for is very different what you're optimizing for, because the conditions are very different. And I think that requires a little bit of education and baby handholding. But I'm sure I think we can get to that point.
I think just to kind of follow up a bit, right? Like a big part of the purpose of this trip for us, I think, is to kind of help us understand and form concretely, what the Africa strategy should be in the future. And I think as far as the answers that we have, I mean, just supporting local groups and identifying, which are the local groups that can make the best use of support is a big part of it, right? And we've definitely made some contacts, both here and in Kenya and in other places. Another really big part of the answer is layer twos, right? And I think layer twos are a part of the answer for two reasons. One part of the reason is that a big part of the reason why Ethereum, the blockchain, has not been succeeding in like pretty much every low income country and region for the last few years is basically fees, right? So I spent a bunch of time in Argentina and other Latin American countries, over the last year and a half, and I've seen some of this personally, right? Like I remember visiting some places in Buenos Aires. Like there was a coffee shop that accepted Bitcoin. There was some or they accepted every cryptocurrency. There were some currency exchangers that accepted cryptocurrencies, and when I looked and saw, the QR code that they showed me, they had a Binance account. I sent them some ETH, and the transaction took a couple of minutes to process. By the way, that's actually one piece of UX that has improved over the last year and a half, right? Over about a year and a half, transactions would often take many minutes to process, but now a lot of the time they just reliably get included in 6 seconds, right? And like EIP 1559 and the merge, I think deserve a lot of credit for that. Like these are actual Ethereum protocol changes that made user experience of the blockchain better in real ways that people could understand, and that's a kind of victory that I think we want to double down on and have 5 more victories like that, right? But the main thing other than that is just the fees, right? So sending that transaction from me to this wallet took I think it was like $1.50. Right? And the other time I sent I sent it, the transaction fee was something like $3.30, right? These are numbers that are totally possible to forget if you are a person in a rich country who has also been part of the crypto space since 2014, and so you already have a pile of Bitcoin and ETH. If you're just someone coming into the ecosystem, even these numbers are, the difference between cryptocurrency being viable and cryptocurrency being not viable. And transaction fees being high are a problem that today Binance as a wallet basically fixes for a lot of people, right? Like in Argentina, most people you just use Binance wallets, and people are used to Binance transactions, 0 transaction fees, and they're instant. I think we've seen the perils of using a totally centralized and a service and thinking that you can trust it just because it's run by a very charismatic person who wears a suit and goes on panels with Bill Clinton and has his face up everywhere in San Francisco. So we want the decentralized approaches to win, right? But the reality is that centralized approaches have this good UX, and as a decentralized ecosystem, we have to match that UX, right? So speed of transaction inclusion and fees. And layer twos solve fees, right? Like layer twos are the way that Ethereum is scaling. And on layer twos already, transaction fees are somewhere between 5 and 10 times lower than they are on layer one. And with EIP 4844 and with future changes, the plan is for fees on layer twos to go even lower. On inclusion speed, layer twos have this concept of pre-confirmations, right? Where you can get a kind of confirmation that your transaction got accepted, often much faster than layer ones can. And this is also a very big and powerful benefit to users, right? So as a technology, layer twos are the only thing that can make using Ethereum convenient and affordable. But also layer twos are important because of the community and talent that they bring, right? So Optimism, Arbitrum, Polygon, Starknet, ZK Sync, Tyco, right? All of these systems that are that are the technology that can make Ethereum affordable to regular users around the world, and actually and convenient. And they are the groups that are often doing a lot of this kind of very direct user and developer outreach, right? And I think they are the group that ultimately also really needs to have stronger links between Africa and the layer 2 teams, and between other parts of the world and the layer 2 teams as well.
Thank you. I think there's a question here. Yep.
One of the things that sparked a lot of building in the crypto space is public goods funding. And Gitcoin has been a very key player in that field, to the extent where even innovations like Uniswap have their roots tied to Gitcoin one way or the other. Now, personally, I've had this experience where I've tried a couple of times to list projects on Gitcoin, and the process has been hectic and it hasn't been successful. And I know a couple of developers that have presented their projects also, and it hasn't been successful. So I'm happy that you are on the ground in Africa and you've seen a lot of things, you've learned a lot of things. I am keen to pick your brain on a possible public good funding mechanism that can be implemented in Africa. So that is the first question. The second question is that most of these protocols or projects or ecosystems have sub-communities in Africa, right? And you spoke about decentralized grants, in the sense that you don't have connection to the Ethereum Foundation, but they give out grants, etc. It's always difficult for Africans or African projects or communities to get access to these grant stuff. So I guess how do we bridge that gap? Does sub-DAO concept help with that? That is the question, where we can have sub-DAOs connected to major DAOs that can help facilitate coordination in that aspect. The third question is actually contract secured revenue. Can we implement, is there a possibility that we can implement this in major protocols where these revenues generated can be funneled to some places in Africa to help developers to here? So that is my questions.
Yeah, I think with public goods funding mechanisms, like I personally, don't yet understand well, like what the particular errors that people have been seeing here, trying to get into the Gitcoin ecosystem. But I think whatever, but a big part of that solution just has to, I think, involve creating just better links between the Gitcoin community and local people here that are trying to get on that, right? So that's also something that I hope is going to start happening soon. And then, but aside from that, like my opinion is that public goods, like it's generally better for public goods funding mechanisms to be diverse. And Gitcoin is one thing, and I think improving Gitcoin and making Gitcoin really live up to its promise is really important. But it's also not the only thing, right? There's often, a lot of kind of local community organizations and local DAOs that do public goods funding, and that's also something that I think needs to be supported much more. There's in optimism or retroactive public goods funding is another good example, right? They're in the process of doing round 2, but they're only getting a very particular sample of projects that that are being rewarded by round 2, right? And that's something where I think, like another example of something where I think just like kind of stronger connections between the communities need to be made. And like in a lot of these cases, like ultimately, I think it makes sense to make these public goods funding mechanisms more kind of localized and kind of multi-level, right? Like one thing in the middle is never going to be able to properly, fund all of the public goods everywhere. But if you have a larger set of local things that are run by different groups of people, then like that creates a larger chance that everything that needs to be funded actually is going to be covered in some way, right? So right now, that's what I hope to see more. Like I hope to just see more variety in public goods funding solutions, and I hope to see both the existing ones and the new ones try to get more support.
I'd like to chime in a little bit on Gitcoin because you're absolutely right. And this is a symptom of what we were discussing earlier because I've been involved with Gitcoin, not like I don't work for Gitcoin, but I've been involved in that community for a long time. I've contributed to a lot of rounds. I'm really fascinated by that project, but there is an incredible underrepresentation of African projects and some other categories on there. And where does that come from? You correctly identified that the first hurdle is getting listed in the first place. And one of the biggest barriers that starts there and continues throughout the process is when people have a lack of personal connection to a community. They recognize that they have an ignorance. They recognize that they don't know the difference between quality projects and poor quality projects and scams, but they stop there if they don't have a point to follow up on. And I've seen with so many projects that try to get listed, and what they're trying to do is they're just trying to say, no, we're a legitimate project, and whoever's engaging with them is saying, I don't know anything about the space, I don't know who these people are, and things like this. And they correctly identify that they're ignorant about that, but then they don't have a next step to follow up on. And in my mind, the obvious next step is you should connect with someone in that community to find out if this is a legitimate project, right? And that's what I'm talking about with building these bridges. If you want people to be able to have that access, you have to take them and have them meet people. They can be meeting people online. They can be participating online in those communities to get to know people. They can be coming to events. And again, if the events they're going to are events that people from here can't get visas to attend, of course they're not going to be meeting the members of the local community there. So again, one solution is you can flip that and have events here. People from there can often get visas to attend here. That's an easier solution to the visa problem. If you're coming and you're meeting people and you're talking to people, even if you haven't met that specific project, you have a point of contact of say, oh, this person would probably know about that. I can ask them if this is a legitimate project. And when you proceed to the next level, let's say you manage to do that. You manage to say, oh, this person knows me. You know, I can show you my GitHub. I can show you enough evidence that I'll get listed as a project. You face the same problem multiplied across all of the Gitcoin funders because every individual person who goes to donate to that website, they're looking at different projects and they're like, I don't know which one is a good project to support because, again, they don't have that personal connection. And so I've said it several times now, but that personal connection is the foundation of addressing that. It's not the complete solution because even as you build that out, that existing distribution of the community is going to be biased. Even if somebody is going to events and getting plugged in, they're spending more time around other people that they're closer to, and they're just going to be thinking of those projects first. And we do see that projects that people are familiar with and know about get more funding just because people know about them. And so the other thing we have to do is we have to build that pipeline into an amplification process where once people know about a local project here, they're amplifying it and they're spreading it out to people who don't already have that personal connection, and they're sharing it around. Even that is not going to be perfect. I've talked to several projects here who have been listed on Gitcoin, and what they've discovered is that the amount of support they get through there is very variable. One time there'll be a lot of attention, they'll get a lot of support, and they'll get a big amount of funding. The next time it doesn't show up, it's not consistent. So it can't be the basis of everything. But within the mechanism that Gitcoin is, I think we can improve that mechanism quite a bit by increasing the amount of contact between the global community and the local community here. Of course, the other things that Vitalik mentioned are also very important too.
This is one area I am working to help bridge, but it's just one solution. So as Vitalik said, I think it would be amazing for more local project entities being set up to even get closer to the more grassroots initiatives. So I think we gotta help bridge a lot of those worlds, and I hope the tide is shifting. And I think more local gatherings and events and all of that help create a gravitation point are valuable. Questions? Cool. Oh, okay. The mic is with you, and then
Yes.
the next questions.
Hi, Miss Purple again. So my question is more, since we talked about community a bit, outside of the developments in Ethereum, so outside of EIP 1559, the merge and the Shanghai update, what on the social layer are you most excited about, coming in the next, I guess, maybe year or next few years? And perhaps just to kind of add on to that, do we have the right amount of the right people that we need within the community and within the ecosystem, or is there a gap that still needs to be filled?
I think there is still a gap on the UX side, right? Like if we look at wallets, there's MetaMask and there's a few other things, but there probably should be more things. If you look at wallet, like making it easier for people to have self-hosted wallets that are actually secure without risking losing all their money if they forget their 12-word passphrase, right? Like there is EIP ERC 4337, there is social recovery, and there is Gnosis Safe, and there's all these things, but like we need user interfaces and we need to build wallets that actually use these things. Wallets that actually do a good job of interfacing between different layer twos, right? Like, and I think also there are existing companies that are making wallets and like people that are doing these things, but often they're like not close enough to different kinds of user groups, right? Like I asked some of them, how are you testing whether or not your social recovery implementation is easy to use? And the answer is like, oh, I ask my non-crypto friend, right? And like that's better than asking their employee, but at the same time, like that's still only one type of non-crypto friend, and like it's still a very kind of biased and a kind of limited sample of the kinds of people that could benefit from wallets with better UX. So I guess the social part of that, like, really is actually, helping these projects and make sure that the direction that they're building is a direction that, like, actually, improves the user experience of people who that need better user experience the most.
Speaking of social communities, I think like the simple answer to your question, is there a gap? Yes, there's still a gap. There's many different types of categories of people who have an incredible amount to contribute and yet don't have a natural niche. And the best way that I can give an example of that is to go back in time and talk about the rise of NFTs. Because when NFTs came along, there were a lot of people who were previously working on like technology type areas who were able to participate. But there was also a whole new range of people who were like, hey, this is actually a space for me where I can get into this and contribute and engage. And it's been amazing for me to see the amazing communities that have grown out of that have reached into other areas. And are we done with that? No, of course not. There are many other areas like this. Now, the question of how we reach out and connect with them is a combination one. Obviously, we need to find things that are actually useful for people to engage with. When we build a technology and it doesn't actually serve a need that someone has, then unless they're personally interested in it or personally fascinated by it, why do they even want to become part of that community, right? But the other part of it is just about once you have identified something and you know that it fits, there's so much noise in this space, right? There's so much going on. I think like a lot of people have probably encountered scams. They have family members who their only experience of blockchain or crypto is an experience of something really scammy. And the ability to wade through that differs a lot depending on the kind of person you are and the type of engagement and the type of knowledge that you have. So some of that needs to be addressed by becoming more open as a community about the ways that we distinguish those. I think a lot of times when you have somebody who's proceeded further in their journey and they've learned a lot, they become more of an expert themselves, and so they get past the point that they are no longer taken in by a lot of these scams. But if you turn out and look around, the people who haven't advanced to that point, they're very vulnerable to a lot of this stuff. And the ramp between the level of expertise and knowledge that's required to be fairly safe from a lot of that noise, and when you're just starting in, is a really long one. And that ramp needs about as much support as we can possibly give it, because people need to climb up that to get to a place where they're not going to be easily taken in by things. And if we want different kinds of people to be able to contribute in our communities, we need to make it safe for them. So that I think is another big part of it.
Who here is from university? University students. Okay. I know some had questions for us back there. Yep.
My name is Samuel. My question is about ZK technology. Recently, it's like everybody's kind of talking about it. like in the developer community. So I wanted to ask Vasily if you can share more knowledge on that. What are the possible use cases, and should I delve right into it as a student, someone learning also and building the community?
I think the answer is absolutely yes. So just to briefly explain what ZK technology is to people who haven't like fully who haven't heard of it deeply before. So it stands for zero knowledge proofs, and it's basically a way to make proofs about information that you have without fully revealing the information that you're making proofs about. Right. So I like even just like a signature is actually a very simple, like special purpose type of zero knowledge proof, right? Because it's basically a proof that says I control this private key, but without actually giving up the private key so anyone else can use it, right? And zero knowledge proofs do things with like just any kind of data in general, right? So if, for example, you want to prove that you know the solution to a math problem, then you can make a proof where the program that you're proving like takes the solution that you know, it checks that the solution is correct, and the proof only verifies if the solution is correct. Right? You send someone that proof, and they know that you have a solution, but the proof only tells them that the solution is correct. It doesn't tell them what the solution is. This is a very powerful technology because I think it really kind of combines together well with a lot of blockchain's weaknesses, right? Because blockchains are a technology that gives these really powerful properties. They let you build applications that are open, permissionless, global, transparent, censorship resistant, all of these things. But they sacrifice two very big things. They sacrifice privacy and they sacrifice scalability. Zero knowledge proofs give you back privacy. And the kinds of zero knowledge proofs that have been developed very recently that are called ZK snarks also give you back scalability, right? So one of the reasons why ZK snarks are powerful is because it's much faster to verify a proof of a computation than it is to run the computation yourself. And so this makes them useful for scaling Ethereum. All of the ZK rollups use them. And the privacy side is really useful for solving some of the privacy challenges on Ethereum, right? So if you want to prove something about yourself, like you want to prove some kind of calculation about your reputation, you want to transfer some coin or like some asset in a privacy preserving way, if you want to do lots of things, then you can do it in a way that still is on chain, gives you the benefits of being on chain, but avoids creating this kind of public link where you reveal to everyone everything about the action that you're taking. And zero knowledge proofs are the technology that lets you do that, right? So like if someone's a developer and they want a kind of a guide to like how to use zero knowledge proofs in some applications, on my blog vitalik.ca, I recently, I think about half a year ago, wrote this article. I think it was something like applications of ZK snarks for privacy. Like if you just go to the site and you control F for privacy, then you can probably find it. And like there's applications like a coin transfer system, a reputation system, a negative reputation system, privacy preserving DOS protection, like a lot of interesting stuff. Privacy preserving voting is in there too, right? Like a lot of like these really powerful things can be done with a combination of blockchains and zero knowledge proofs. So if someone is interested in that area, I definitely highly encourage people to get into zero knowledge proofs and try to build applications that use them.
Thank you. I'm so sorry, there's a guy behind you from university who had a question, so we'll come back to you.
Hello everyone. My question is, I want Vitalik to explain me what is 51 attack.
Okay. So so 51% attacks are this a really important concept in blockchains, right? So I think so. First of all, just stepping back a bit, right? Like, what do blockchains do? Blockchains are an engine for agreeing on stuff when the thing that you're agreeing on is a thing that can be kind of understood by a live running system, but it's not something that you can mathematically prove directly, right? So a big example of this is what's called the double spending problem. Let's say I have 100 coins, and everyone agrees that I have 100 coins. But then I create and sign a transaction that sends 100 coins to Chica, and then I create and sign another transaction that sends the same 100 coins to Jeff. And I broadcast both of these transactions. In order to have a functioning monetary system, it should not be possible for both of these to succeed, right? Because if they succeed, then I've turned 100 coins into 200 coins. So what a blockchain does is it agrees on order. So the blockchain comes to some agreement on which of these two transactions it sees first. It accepts that one and it rejects the other one, right? So this is what blockchains do, and this is why blockchains can be the backbone of digital currencies and other things, while like the BitTorrent network, for example, cannot be the backbone of a digital currency, right? Now, what is a 51% attack? Now, in order for the blockchain to kind of come to an agreement on these like which of these two transactions came first, there needs to be some kind of voting procedure, right? And so it's this very decentralized system, and you have a large number of computers all around the world, and they're performing the task of voting to agree on, did we see this transaction first or did we see this transaction first, right? There's rounds of voting, sometimes multiple rounds, sometimes it gets complicated, but eventually they reach an agreement. This voting procedure has an assumption, which is that the majority of people participating are honest, right? And if the majority participating are not honest, then you could have a situation where they lie, right? So, for example, what they could do is they could first come to an agreement so that my transaction to Chica came first, but then that same group could later on, if they also come to an agreement that says that my transaction coming to Jeff succeeded. And when that happens, this is called a reorg, right? A reorganization, where the block that contains the transaction from myself going to Chica gets thrown away. It's no longer part of the chain anymore. And the block that contains the transaction going from me to Jeff gets accepted. It becomes accepted as being part of the new chain, right? Now, normally, blockchains are kind of like convergent, right? So once they agree on something, they keep agreeing to it. And there's even mathematical proofs that say if either like 51% or 66%, depending on the assumptions, like if the majority of the participants in the system are honest, then once the system agrees on something, it sticks to that agreement and it doesn't go back, right? There is this property called finality that like Ethereum really cares about. But if this honesty assumption does not hold, right? And if the majority of participants that are doing this voting are dishonest, then they can agree on something and then later change their minds and then agree on something else, right? And like that process, like this idea that a dishonest majority can just change its mind, it can block transactions, it can do all of these nasty things that completely violate what a blockchain is supposed to do. Like that's what a 51% attack is, right? And a big part of the job of a consensus protocol is to try to make 51% attacks as difficult and as expensive for the attacker as possible.
Thank you. I'll take two more questions from university students and then we'll go back to the general public.
Okay.
Yep.
My question is directed at Vitalik. So I read The Infinite Machine, and in it, Camilla mentions that you took a sabbatical from your university education, traveled the world, spent some time building a couple of crypto projects before ending up co-founding Ethereum with a couple of friends. My first question then is, did you going into that sabbatical know you are going to co-found Ethereum? If not, do you think you would have stumbled around into eventually building Ethereum?
I don't think I would have stumbled into Ethereum on my own, right? So the thing that really inspired creating Ethereum was going around in the world and seeing the projects that other people were working on already, right? So in particular, when I was visiting Israel in October 2013, there's a lot of very smart mathematicians in Israel and a lot of people working on like these really interesting and really advanced crypto projects, right? So Covered Coins and Mastercoin were probably the top two. And Covered Coins is this protocol for releasing assets on a blockchain. And Mastercoin is this protocol for not just issuing your own assets, but also doing more complicated financial transactions between them, right? And I looked at these projects. I was even working for both of these projects at the time. And I started to see the opportunities for how to make something like Mastercoin more general purpose while still like even making it simpler at the same time, right? Replace two features with one feature that does the thing that two of them do and then does even more. And like it was that chain of thought that eventually led to creating Ethereum as a completely separate system, right? So I think interacting with stuff that other people are building that is on the frontier is like I think it's a necessary part of getting to the point of creating something that is on the frontier yourself. So it's like that kind of direct interaction I think is a form of education that I highly encourage.
Thank you. We'll take one question from some of the students on that side.
My name is Anthony. One key application of the blockchain is its ability to provide a trustless and decentralized system. So how do you see the blockchain be applied in the future beyond finance, considering the role of governments in defining ownership?
How do we see the use of blockchains beyond finance? Do you want to take that one?
Specifically, looking at this question of how governments are participating in ownership, this is a really important question. One of the reasons that there's a lot of emphasis on tokens and currencies and blockchains is because the token itself is the ownership, right? The thing that you own is the only thing that you need, that your balance, your number. That's the only thing that's trying to be preserved. When you're talking about ownership of other assets that exist in the physical world, the blockchain is just math. How are you going to build a connection between that physical item and this abstract mathematical system? And whatever your answer is, it's going to be some type of social system. And this is where governments are very important, because a government is usually the place where we as a society coordinate to build these kinds of social systems that allow us to say what we mean by ownership is that you have some type of right, or what we mean by rental, or what we mean by assignment, or whatever the property is, that you have some kind of right that's recognized by other human beings. And when that right is infringed upon, there's some process that you can use. I think that whatever the name of that system is, it has to exist. And it's very hard to imagine a system that does all of those things that wouldn't be called some type of system of government. Now, there are many interesting ideas that people have around blockchains about creating things that bring in that social aspect, about have people respond and react. Sometimes you can have incentives and financial and economic incentives that offer a financial penalty or some kind of financial record that turns into a credit score or something like this that can start to have an impact on that. But in many cases, at the end of the day, what you need is a local agreement between people who are in the same physical space about how you're going to treat an object. And by the time you get to that level of integration with the community, it's about being in consensus with your local neighborhood, with your local country, with the people who are physically close to you about how you're going to treat things. And even if the way that you're going to treat things is going to involve something like a blockchain technology, if you're going to, for example, if you're going to take a land registry and authenticate that registry using keys that are stored on a blockchain, or that any process of modification has to somehow be registered in some public way through a blockchain, even if you're socially agreeing to that process, the legitimacy of that process will be decided on by how people around you view that system. If they don't like it, they might overthrow it and change it, right? So this relationship between mathematical systems like blockchains and social systems, which is usually where government is involved, is very critical. And personally, I'm not of the opinion that we should assume blockchain can replace everything. I think we need to look at each situation and look at the value that blockchain brings and look at the relationship with that local system like a government and decide what the trade-offs are, what the benefits are, what parts of blockchain can be introduced to add legibility, to add legitimacy. But not all of that is going to be in the code. A lot of that is going to be in the community and the community's decision of what's important and what's valuable. In the same way that a government has this question of legitimacy, it has the question of, do people think the government is legitimate? Will they do what the government says? What will they do when the government wants to do something and they don't agree? Those same questions all exist for blockchain technologies applied outside of the digital realm. So it's a very broad topic, and I think there's a lot of interesting things to be said there. But at the end of the day, whatever system is, and however it does or doesn't use blockchain technology, it's really a social process. It's really about how people, human beings in the same physical space, agree to do something. And the tool of blockchain can be useful in that process, but somehow people still have to do that job of coordinating.
Got time for a few more questions. We've heard from a lot of men today. It would be amazing to hear from women. Can you please give the microphone to Chika in front here?
So this is a question for everybody. So I think recently we've been talking a lot about how Web3, blockchain, crypto is all things that are actually needed here on the continent, right? And that we are actually a great case study for the reason why this was created in the first place. One of the things I think that is not talked about enough is the fact that Africans are naturally communal. We have a lot of practice that make us communal in nature, and that we actually depend on our community. So I'm curious around, specifically around DAOs and coordination, what is exciting you about in the space? And if you have seen even examples on your trip around how that can be applied to DAOs and how people from the West can learn from us around just our communal practice.
I'm happy to jump in on that one. I think you're completely right. And we've just been talking about that relationship of the local community to a process, to assign legitimacy, to decide how to coordinate. And there are an enormous number of structures that do that, and they're not all governments, right? I've seen an incredible number of examples of this. And an aspect of this that I think is particularly exciting is when you look at an institution that is a community tool for coordination, and it might have a financial aspect. So there are a lot of places that have groups that do savings. There are a lot of places that have groups that perform some kind of risk protection, whether it's for medical or emergency issues, or provide some kind of liquidity for people who are starting businesses, loans in the community, whatever those processes are. Oftentimes, you'll look at that process, and if you're not too familiar with it, you look at it as a financial process. And there is often a financial element, but what you're also seeing is a community process. And the community aspects are often, from my perspective, even more important than the financial aspects. I've seen a lot of examples where somebody will look at a project like that and say, oh, we could put that on a blockchain and we could copy the financial flows. And they really pay attention to the financial structure of it. And the finance is often important and relevant. But there's a community structure around that that has a richness and a complexity that's very difficult to encode in a series of rules. And one thing that I'm very excited about is people looking at groups like that, not trying to take that financial structure and just pull it out, put it on a blockchain, and put 10,000 people in it that aren't going to have the same community, that aren't going to have the same understanding of each other, that aren't going to have the same process of building trust, that aren't going to have the same mechanisms for assessing risk, for understanding the difference between like a circumstance that's beyond a person's control and an instance of fraud or misbehavior. All those subtleties that make these communities work. Instead, what I think is fascinating is to look at that architecture of trust in the community itself as a resource. And I would love to see more projects that instead of trying to extract the financial part of that and turn it into 20 lines of code on the blockchain, look at taking blockchain projects and plugging them into these communities to make the blockchain project better. And specifically, one of the biggest challenges we've been talking about usability is if you're in a decentralized system and something goes wrong, if you lose your device, you forget your password, whatever your process is, what are you going to do? Typically, in the centralized world, we say that you just call support and figure it out, which doesn't always work. Sometimes support isn't available and people aren't responsive, especially if the platform you're using is some mega international tech corporation that doesn't value you as an individual. But either way, when we build a new system, we have to have some process. And if that process is naive, if it's just there's one key, and if you ever forget it, you lose everything, that's not practical. That's not useful for people. So I'm very fascinated by the idea of using these communities and the existing trust architecture, the fact that they know each other, the fact that they know what to do when something goes wrong, the fact that they have some kind of structure to how they organize and arrange themselves. I would be very interested in using that as a strategy to do things like account recovery, to do things like onboarding. When you're just coming into blockchain, you don't need to like learn all the math and all the keys and all the things at once. You can have something that starts small and then scales up with a level of finance, but usually that requires some level of human judgment. And the people who are best at doing that human judgment are probably your local community who knows you and understands you. And when something goes wrong, you can go to them and say, hey, I lost my device. Can we get together and do this recovery process, like the social recovery that Vitalik has mentioned, or something like that? But wrapped up in the methods and ways that those people already do things, I think that could be incredibly useful. And I think it could flip this architecture upside down of, instead of having people only plug into the blockchain, it's the blockchain that's plugged into these communities. And these communities are the things that make the blockchain useful for more than just financial applications.
So Songi, who's sitting right next to you, has been doing a lot of work in this space. And one of the things that she keeps talking about is that so much of the focus in the DAO space is on the like blockchain-based collective decision making, but 95% of the work is actually in the humanware, not on the software. And I think that's something that a lot of DAOs that are trying to build community really struggle with, is the jump super quick around the DAO tooling and all of that without figuring out the human element of it. And so whenever you're going to communities that already have a shared set of values, shared understanding what they're trying to do and all of that, it becomes a lot easier to build all the other components of it, because ultimately so much of our society is used to extremely hierarchical ways of working, and trying to build a culture of working and thriving in DAO formats is actually quite hard. There's a bit of unlearning that's needed, and I see different communities really struggling without doing the work of actually figuring that as the human element out. So I mean, that's one thing that I respect of what you two are doing, is you're spending a lot of time on the human and connective and community element of it, and I think that's really what makes communities last over a long period of time. There was one question over there, and we'll come to you. So, gentlemen.
Hello, my name is Andrew, and my question is mainly based on the recent events that have happened in the crypto space. So, looking at what happened to FTX and what happened to the Luna coin, yeah, a lot of people will have doubts about the whole crypto industry. And though it's very promising, but some people are just not sure if they want to commit their entire business into the crypto space. So I wanted to ask personally, is there anything Ethereum is doing to solve that problem, to help people who are more interested in the crypto but are scared to jump into it because of what has been happening? Is there anything that is being done in that side?
No, I think it's these are definitely really important problems, and some of the barriers that the space has to cross if we want to like really get to some kind of a greater mass adoption than what we have right now. I think the interesting thing about the FTX situation and the Luna situation is that they teach kind of similar, but also somewhat different lessons, right? So to me, like FTX is basically a case of a very centralized entity. And yes, that entity is part of the cryptocurrency space and it's operating with decentralized assets, but it's ultimately a very centralized thing controlled by a very small group of people. It was even much more centralized than typical companies are, right? Like typical companies often have different kinds of internal checks and balances to reduce the power of like one or a very small number, a group of people to do something wrong. FTX did not even have that, and the result it was a completely opaque black box system that ended up failing and breaking on people in the worst possible way. Right? The Luna had, I think, some element of that, and there were definitely aspects of the Luna and Terra design that were like completely opaque. But at the same time, there wasn't a big aspect to it, which just is that the Luna mechanism was bad, right? Like, not all DeFi mechanisms are good, and DeFi is a set of tools, and like financial engineering is a discipline, and disciplines can be used to make good things, and they can be used to make terrible things, and they can be used to make things that break, and they can be used to make things that look good for a while and then eventually break, right? Like, if you have access to a factory, you can build a wheel that works, but you can also build a wheel that seems like it works better for a short amount of time, is 4 times cheaper, but then after 6 months it completely breaks, right? So in the case of one of the lessons that I learned about DeFi is like simple DeFi is good, but complex DeFi is usually bad, right? There are examples of DeFi projects that have existed for a long time. Uniswap, Maker, all of the basic ones, right? They've existed for a long time. So they've handled billions of dollars of people's money, and they have not broken. Meanwhile, Luna comes in, handles people's money for about a year. It goes all the way up to 34 billion, and then it breaks. And the way that it broke was like it was even something that a bunch of people in the Ethereum space expected, right? Like if you look at the system and you look at the way that it promises 19% rates, for example, and you just have a lot of experience just looking at and dealing with different like algorithmic stablecoin designs. Like what are the ingredients that makes up an algorithmic stablecoin that can last, and you know what makes up one that looks like it lasts for some time, but then breaks as soon as there is a bear market. So, like the reality is that just because something touches crypto, that doesn't by itself mean that it's good, right? And there's lots of ways to create things that touch crypto, but actually do not inherit any of the advantages that blockchains or decentralized technology or mechanism design or all of these ideas are trying to bring, right? And like this is difficult because like crypto is this big marketing category, but the problem with crypto as a marketing category is that like it's almost a natural tragedy of the commons, right? Because crypto is like this category with no gatekeeping. Anything, as long as it touches Bitcoin or Ether or even Tron, can call itself part of crypto, and it kind of takes on, all of the goodwill that the name has. And so it's just, it's kind of expected that lots of people are going to come in. They're going to grab up the goodwill, use it to kind of, create things that are completely unstable or just totally steal people's money until the name crypto basically has no goodwill left, right? And I think it's like a combination of a technical problem and a community self-policing problem. And the technical problem is basically like let's make more like DeFi that actually is built to last, right? Like let's make more things like MakerDAO and fewer things that are like Luna. Or on the other hand, let's build better social recovery wallets or self-custody wallets in general so that people can more safely hold on to their funds by themselves so that people don't have to trust FTX or some other exchange to hold their funds for them, right? Like these are technical problems, and I think we can really improve on things from a technical point of view. But the community self-policing problem is also an important one, right? Like the the blockchains by themselves are neutral, they're permissionless. Like Ethereum is not going to censor Duke One, right? But and so at the same time, the question is, well, what in the community is going to not let Duke One in, right? Like what in the community is going to actually very clearly express the difference between projects that do make sense and projects that do not make sense. And this is also a difficult problem. And often this problem happens because communities are not strong enough, right? So one example of this happening is that in many parts of the world, what happens is that there are meetups, but in a particular town, there's only one meetup. And this meetup is run by a person. And this person has a very hard time getting funded. And what happens is that this person, just because they have to get funded, they end up accepting sponsorships from pretty much anyone. Like, hey, I'm ZFX protocol. And, I'm just going to pay you $5,000 to run your meetup, but just please let me present for a bit. And then ZFX protocol comes along and it talks about how it's going to give you 12% a month, and a bunch of people listen, and then 6 months later it blows up, right? So like when there are good communities are lacking, like often much worse communities kind of step in and and take the reins, and that's really something that needs to be avoided. And I think there are different ways of trying to solve this problem, but the one lever that we as a community definitely have access to is like actually being the good community and helping people that really have the right intentions but that don't necessarily have the right resources like actually step up and help each other, right? And that's something that I think the Ethereum Foundation has like done well in some contexts, but definitely not done well in a lot of other contexts. And that's something that I think is on, both the Ethereum Foundation and on the, everyone in the global crypto community that does have, influence and resources and power to do their part to try to fix as soon and as well as possible.
Thank you. There's a question right next to you. Yes, please. And then we'll come to that side.
Hello, my name is Ibrahim Azam. I own a company that does blockchain development called Bitterbit, based in Ghana here, and we're working on lots of interesting blockchain projects. One project is about guaranteeing data integrity on the blockchain. Okay, this is me, and my question is, why don't Ethereum itself develop a decentralized exchange, which would guarantee more trust by the Ethereum holders and clients? Me myself, I don't trust centralized exchanges. I only use centralized exchanges to cash out my money,
Right.
or buy crypto, and that's
Yeah.
it. What I'm interested in, especially in Ghana or Africa, is bridging crypto into mobile money in a decentralized way. Because currently, how it's done, you transfer it to Binance, you sell your cryptos into mobile money. It's in your mobile money. If you want to buy, also mobile money. So if there is a way to communicate with MTN or Vodafone or these big companies to bridge
Yeah.
directly in a decentralized way, that would be awesome, because this will guarantee mass adoption, and we will move away from centralized exchanges, because this way you'll just transfer from your wallet in a decentralized way, flips it into mobile money. Also, this will be guarantee the next transition to the next phase, which is e-currencies, like in Nigeria, the Iniara, maybe in Ghana, they're working on e-currency too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, no. So the way that I think about this, right, is so first of all, Uniswap exists, right? Lots of people use Uniswap. I personally used Uniswap literally multiple times, just like in February, like this month of this year. So the question we want to ask is like, if people are not using Uniswap or something like Uniswap, what is the thing that it's not providing? And I think there's a couple of answers. One of the answers is that a lot of people are not comfortable enough with existing self-custody options, and like and so this is why they put their coins onto a centralized exchange, because like they trust that centralized exchange to do recovery for them, right? And to me, the way that the decentralized ecosystem can compete with that is by creating these more decentralization native forms of backup and recovery and all of these things, like social recovery and multi-sig wallets, account abstraction, and all of these problems, right? And these are things that exist, but they have to get much better from a fees and UX point of view. The second big reason is the reason that you mentioned, right? Which is that people need exchanges to convert between the crypto ecosystem and local fiat currency ecosystems. And the problem with that is that this is not something that this is not something that you can do entirely in the digital space, right? Like the reason why Uniswap can do these trades of like ETH to DAI or ETH to USDC or ETH to Maker or whatever is because these are all ERC20 assets that are defined inside Ethereum, and programs that are defined inside Ethereum can read things that happen inside Ethereum, and they can do things and interact with other applications inside Ethereum. If you look at mobile money, right? Like there is no built-in gateway for an Ethereum account to own mobile money units. There's no built-in gateway for an Ethereum account to force a transfer of mobile money units. There's no built-in gateway for an Ethereum smart contract to verify that a mobile money payment has been made, right? And so for these reasons, there is an unavoidable trust problem to some extent. And the way that that's been solved in kind of my impression of both Africa, but and some of the other attempts to do this kind of decentralized exchange, just like in the 10 years of crypto's history in general, is through escrow agents, right? So we all trust one guy, and I send 0.01 ETH to the guy. Then you send $16 to me. I verify that I received $16, and $0.01 gets sent by the guy to you, right? There's a couple of problems with this. One is that like there is still a bit of a trust problem, because what if I send like I claim that I sent $16, but I never actually sent $16. And how do you check? And then, right? The other problem is that you have to trust the guy. And you have this guy in the middle, and what if the guy disappears? For the second problem, there is a natural smart contract solution, right? 2 of 3 escrow. So instead of I send 0.01 ETH to the guy, you send $16 to me, and I say yes, and the guy sends 0.01 ETH to you. What happens is I send 0.01 ETH to a multisig, 2 of 3. The 3 keys are me, you, and the guy. Then you send me $16. I confirm. And by default, just I confirm and you confirm, and I release the money, the 0.01 ETH, and you can have it. Only when the two of us have a disagreement, the guy can do something. But the only thing that the guy can do is send the 0.01 ETH back to me or send the 0.01 ETH to you. The guy cannot steal the money by themselves, right? And this is like, it's not perfect because there's still the risk that the guy colludes with me or colludes with you, but it's a much lower risk. And this is something that can be done and that can significantly reduce trust risk in escrows. And also by doing so, make it possible for more people, like people who have lower amounts of like existing reputation, to become these escrow agents and make them and make this market more competitive, right? And like if that's something that happens, that can already be an improvement. For the second problem, like what if, I claimed that I received, or I received $60, I claimed that I didn't, or maybe I never sent $16, but I sent that but I claimed that I sent it. In these cases, they like I think we have to rely on reputation systems, and we have to rely on like the equivalent of credit scoring infrastructure of some kind, and that's something that I think like blockchains and cryptography and can potentially make better. But like that is a difficult problem, and you're not going to quite get to a perfect solution, right? So like I personally would definitely highly encourage someone to try to create this kind of decentralized exchange, and I think that's a project that I think a lot of people in the Ethereum ecosystem would be very excited to support. But it is an area where there are a lot of these very specific challenges, and like you can't make a general purpose solution. Like the fact that you're interfacing with local financial systems, the fact that you're interfacing with local forms of trust, all of this means that you can't have this general purpose solution that works everywhere. And so I think there's a lot of legwork that just unavoidably needs to be done by people on the ground to make something like this happen. But like, I really hope that something does happen. And I think, if it does, then, we should be supportive in ways that we can.
Thank you. We'll take one question from that side and then come back to you. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Likem. I'm very interested in infrastructure and tooling. I have a follow-up question on ZK technology. My question is, recently I've been reading a lot about ZK EVMs, through the launch of ZK Sync 2.0, and I want to know where are we now with ZK EVMs, and which elements of ZK EVMs should get us interested as developers building on ZK EVMs? That's my question.
Yeah, so ZKVMs are definitely very important and a very big deal right now. So the big projects in that space that I know about, right? One is the privacy and scaling explorations team, so the Barry Whitehat's teams, ZKVM, and this is one that Scroll is collaborating with. This is one that Tycho is collaborating with, right? The other one is Polygon Hermes, which is what the Polygon team with Jordi Bailina is working on. The third is there is a ZKVM written in Starkware's Cairo language. That is also a project. A fourth is ZK Sync, which is not quite an EVM. It's more like ZK Solidity, but it's, I think, slowly moving in towards supporting more and more of the like EVM code. So all of these projects exist, and one of the ways to use them is to just use ZK rollups when they come out. But if someone wants to actively develop on them, then like the thing that I would encourage is like obviously you have to just get acquainted with the frameworks, right? So Circom, Cairo, like all of these, they all have their own tutorials, and I encourage people to read the tutorials, go through them, go through some exercises. In the case of Cairo also has excellent tutorials of its own. Like try to build simpler applications and then kind of go, work up from there, and get to the point where like you can actually understand how some of these things work on the inside and contribute to them, right? So that's if you want to be a developer, and if you want to be a user of these platforms, then like either you're using zkVM just by using Scroll or using Tycho or using an EVM implementation on StarkNet, or you're using these zkVMs by making your own zk Rollup or zk Validium or one of these systems. And in that case, like obviously you would have to work with the technology a bit more closely. But even there, like I think a lot of the kind of work at the beginning ends up being very similar, right? It's just kind of getting acquainted with how these systems work in general. And then the other thing that often helps is like actually interacting with some of the teams and the people working on these things in person, right? So, if like you can find like get to one of a ZK event in person, like this is something that's happening more and more, then like I think that's a good opportunity. And like I personally definitely hope that more of them start happening in Africa soon. I think that's definitely one of the things that we can do more to encourage. But even if not in person, like online, there's a lot of opportunities. There's a lot of these like active ways to learn by like not just learn by reading and learn by participating, and like that's something that I encourage people to do if they want to get into that space.
Hello. Recently, you did talk about steel addresses. I would like to ask you why you think it's necessary when it's kind of trade off with transparency.
I mean, I think like better forms of privacy for regular users on the blockchain is something that just is important and needs to happen if we want to get widespread adoption, right? Because I think a lot of people are not even realizing just the kinds of personal information that they're putting on chain about their personal relationships, their spending habits, like all of their activity that's happening on chain. And if Ethereum is going to become more mainstream, then reducing the amount of info about just like each individual person that gets broadcasted to the entire world so that large corporations and pretty much anyone can do analysis on it, but like us as individuals probably can't, is something that we are going to just have to do, right? Like I think the thing that we want to get closer to is this idea of like users controlling their own data, and if they need to prove it to someone to reveal data to someone to prove that they're trustworthy, then they should have the tools to be able to do that. But like that kind of revealing you should not be revealing everything to the world by default, right? And so ways to improve privacy in a way that is practical, possible for people to use, works well with existing infrastructure, and that is safe. This is a difficult challenge, but it's a challenge that a lot of people have been working on. And like I think stealth addresses are like one part of the solution that can preserve privacy for a particular set of important use cases.
Just to gauge the room, how many questions are still out there? Raise your hand really high if you have it, just so that we can see. Okay, I think there was a gentleman in the blue shirt back there who had one. And then we'll come back.
Hi. So firstly, thank you guys for working on Ethereum. I'm sure it's benefited most of us in this room. So my question, especially to Jeff, is what potential or implications do you think integrating artificial intelligence and blockchain technology has for Africa's economic development? Thank you.
This is a very broad question, but of course, there's a lot of excitement around AI right now and a lot of things happening there. In the time that I've been in the blockchain space for 13 years, there's never been a time when I haven't seen someone talk about the connection between AI and blockchain, and there has never been a time when I have seen it come to somewhere useful. That doesn't mean that it can't happen. I think that when you put different kinds of technology together, if you're very careful about thinking about the use case that you're addressing and making sure that that technology is the best way to meet your needs, then amazing things can happen. And just because I don't know that something will work doesn't mean it won't work. I don't know how most things work. But one of the reasons that I haven't seen a lot of existing work that successfully marries AI with blockchain is for two reasons. One, AI, even when it becomes more accessible, is still a relatively computationally intensive operation. Usually when we're doing things on blockchains and we want to verify that something was done by a program, for example, if that program was an AI, we have to produce some kind of proof. For a long time, we were producing those proofs directly, and certainly you could not afford the gas to run an AI algorithm on chain. We do have these new technologies like zero knowledge techniques that allow you to prove a larger operation in a smaller number of computations. But even with those technologies, they're not at the point where they can encompass these huge large language models and a lot of the things that we're currently seeing in AI. That doesn't mean it won't happen in the future, but so far it's not been very feasible to verify the output of these AI processes on chain. So that knocks out a large class of use cases where you might want to use an AI to make decisions or to have authority over something. The second thing is that when you look at the AI technology itself, even when we have these really interesting applications that really astonish us and the ability of AIs to do things in natural language, the level of integrity and control that we have over the specific operation of the mechanism is often limited. And so if you look at putting a system like that in charge of a very technically complicated thing like a blockchain, there's a huge amount of things you have to think about to make that safe.
I just want to say thank you all very much for coming, for asking really deep and thoughtful questions, and happy to continue the conversation outside.